Many times, people ask about hearing from God when they are praying in tongues. And even people who don't pray in tongues, generally, most believers are very curious about hearing from God. Previously, I have explained a little bit about hearing from God when you are praying in tongues, but I didn't go into so much detail. Most of these details, they are very complicated, and that is why I didn't want to go so deep into those details at first. But today, I will go into details to a level that I have not touched before. If you get lost along the way, don't worry, because at the end of the video, I will make a very simple conclusion for you to understand in case you don't understand the deep explanations I will be giving. To understand how God speaks, you have to go to the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, the Bible tells us that in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Now we have to begin there. The first thing that you need to understand is dimensions. In simple terms, dimensions is just space. In mathematics, they explain a dimension as the number of coordinates that make a vertex, or in simple terms, the number of lines that make a point or a corner. Because we live in a three-dimensional world, in your house, if you look at any given corner, there are three lines that go into that corner. The second thing that you need to understand is that in the very beginning, there was just dimensions, or in other words, there was just space. The Bible calls this a void. When God began creation, he brought order in this chaotic void that existed. And part of that order was to make dimensions. So basically, God ordained the first dimension, second dimension, third dimension, fourth dimensions, onwards up to infinity. There are infinite dimensions because God himself is infinite, and everything that he creates takes up his nature, which becomes automatically infinite just as he is infinite. Now, God created different things to fit in different dimensions. And this is something very important that you need to understand. In the zero dimension, which is the lowest form of dimension, God created words. In the first dimension, God created time. In the second dimension, God created thoughts and reasoning. In the third dimension, we have our physical bodies and every other physical thing that we know. Then an important factor is that sound is actually existent in all dimensions. This is something very important that you will need to understand what I want to put across. Now, in the zero dimension, where words exist, there are very peculiar characteristics. First, in that zero dimension, there is no length, there is no width, there is no height. In physics, they usually say matter is anything that has mass and it occupies space. But this is only applicable to the third dimension. In the zero dimension, the objects that exist there, the creation that exists there, does not occupy space and it has no mass, but it actually exists. In the first dimension, we have time. And as we all know, time only ever moves in one direction, which is forward. This is why even the Bible talks about the end of time. And even Jesus would refer to it a number of times when he was talking at the end of the age, this will happen. At the end of time, this will happen. Because time is moving towards the end only in one direction. Our thoughts and reasoning belong to the second dimension. They belong here because in our thoughts, we can actually think forward, we can think about the future, and at the same time, we can also think about the past. So basically, our thoughts can move in two directions, forward and backwards, which makes them two-dimensional. Then, of course, we are in the third dimension, and our experience is the experience of the third dimension, the way we experience things around us. Now, when God is speaking to you, all these things are in consideration. Because God himself dwells beyond the realm of dimensions, what happens is that when he wants to speak to you, he has to speak to you according to a particular dimension, because your existence is based on a particular dimension. From our third dimension, when we are speaking, our words come out, but at the same time, they come out with sound. But it is very important for you to know that sound and words are actually different. Our ears only hear sound, and then from that sound, we get meaning. Apostle Paul mentioned this when he was talking about interpretation of tongues when someone is speaking in tongues. And he was saying that if someone speaks and there is no variation in the in the syllables that the person is speaking. How can people deduce meaning from it? Now, back to the explanation of dimensions that I gave you before. Words exist in the 0 dimension, and meaning and reasoning exists in the 2nd dimension, and then sound exists in all dimensions. So when you are speaking your words, basically it is your words going out, and at the same time there is sound accompanying those words. So in the 3rd dimension, they look like one thing. But in real sense, words and sounds are different. This is very important when it comes to understanding how God speaks. When God is speaking, he has the ability to speak words with sound and also words without sound. During the time of Jesus' baptism, a voice spoke from heaven. In that situation, God was speaking both words and sound together. That is why people could hear a voice speaking from heaven. And God did that because when you are in a 3-dimensional world, you cannot understand things unless words are accompanied with sound. But then in other realms, in other dimensions, God chooses to speak words without sound. And this is where things get very confusing, because words exist in the 0 dimension. They have power to influence everything. And the easiest way to think about it is, think about the number 0 in mathematics. If you multiply any number with 0, the result will always be 0. Now that property of the number 0 bears what? The power of the 0 dimension. Basically what 0 does is that it makes every other number like itself when it is multiplied by that number. And this is why the words that are spoken, they go out and they convert everything into their own form. So when God was saying, let there be light, that was a word that was spoken. And because that word was spoken, when it came in contact with everything else that was around it, it made that everything else around it to be light. Just the same way the number 0, when it comes in contact with any other number, when it is multiplied by any other number, it converts that number back to 0. And this is why creation was made through words. So when God is speaking to you in the 3rd dimension and he wants you to hear in 3 dimensions, he will usually send a 3-dimensional creature. Basically, he will send a prophet to you who speaks words and sounds. So he will pass to you the message. But you see, when God himself is speaking to you, he will speak to you from the 0 dimension, which are just words without sound. And this is why people say they hear a still small voice. But actually that voice doesn't have sound. There is no way to explain it in 3 dimensions because this is a 0-dimensional creation. So just inwardly, you will have this conviction. And then you will use your reasoning, which is in the 2nd dimension, to actually deduce meaning from that conviction. And then you can now act it out in the 3-dimensional. So in simple terms, God speaks to you in words without sound, which the Bible calls a still small voice. God bless you.